time for PerfBytes. What the is PerfBytes? The fourth square meal of the day. Don't book like PerfBytes. Waffles, microwave ready. Blobbity blah, blobbity blah. Add nutritional value to your brain. It's time for PerfBytes with your hosts Mark Tomlinson and James Pulley. PerfBytes. Whatever.
Good morning, everyone. It's time for PerfBytes with your not specifically disrespectful of vegan hosts, James Pulley and Mark Tomlinson. And as we speak to you this morning over the internet, we can assure you that more than one person is reaching that breaking point where they're just about ready to throw their computer out the window because it's just going too slow. James, how are you this morning?
I am doing well this morning. I'm not as hyper-caffeinated as I was on the previous show, nor as tired. So I think I've reached a point of zen from a exhaustion and caffeination perspective.
That's good. You've reached an equilibrium of sorts.
Exactly.
That's
yes.
good. And let me in PerfBytes in the PerfBytes culture, today is a very significant day. So I will wish you a very happy International Pancake Day from the International House of Pancakes, James.
Thank you, Mark. Last year, right at this time, we were sitting in, well, maybe a few hours later than now, but we were sitting in an IHOP, and it was International Pancake Day, and we were looking at the IHOP website, and we weren't really very happy with what we were seeing.
No, they were overwhelmed with the enthusiastic attendance to the international, because I think they had a coupon. And I don't know if this year if they have a coupon, but everyone listening in PerfBytes, which are all 6 of you, will go to the International House of Pancakes and download a coupon, which you could go, I think, and that could happen. But I think that's what took them down last year, which is a great way for the marketing department to promote things without understanding that the website can't handle how popular pancakes are, I think. Anyway.
I took a look at the IHOP website this morning, and so far, so good.
So far, so good.
But, maybe the word is just getting out on International Pancake Day. We'll have to wait and see.
That could be. Well, today's show, believe it or not, we're going to monitor more than just pancakes. We're going to talk about performance monitoring. It's probably way too short for James and I to cover everything that we can teach you and share with you about performance monitoring. But if you only listen to the first 5 minutes of this show, which we're still in the first 5 minutes of this show, there is one golden rule about performance monitoring before you go too much farther, and that is, if you don't measure it, you can't improve it. And that's like the golden rule. So if we can't take a measurement, we can't actually do anything to optimize and improve things around performance. So mostly for the rest of the show, James and I will probably just be ranting about, stories from people who didn't monitor this and didn't monitor that, and they completely, hit the dust and crashed hard. But we'll get into that. So before we get going, James, we have some industry news to share today. Is that true?
We do have some news. IBM is sending the Watson supercomputer back to college. I don't know if everyone here is familiar with Watson, but it is the only supercomputer to be a Jeopardy champion. Watson has a natural language interface which allows it to take in digitized versions of books, journals, encyclopedias, things of that nature, and then respond to natural language queries as well. Well, IBM has provided a Watson instance to the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute for about 3 years in order to improve its natural language processing capabilities. From my perspective, I think probably what's going to happen is it's going to spend about 2 years in the computer science department, and then it's probably going to spend about a year in the psychology department while they analyze Watson to figure out why it can't get a date. Yeah, that's at least from my perspective.
It would not be for the name Watson, especially with the new Elementary series, where Watson is a hottie. I think Lucy Liu.
I was going to suggest if Microsoft ever built a supercomputer powered by Windows, they should probably name it Holmes. Just to kind of one up
I think that's a good idea. Yeah, very good.
Speaking of Microsoft has launched a new version of its Office Online product, termed Office 365 Home Premium. So this is for the home office worker or perhaps students who need the full version of Office but don't want to have it locally. It is more targeted at tablet and mobile use as well. And this takes me back really over 20 years at this point to a 1991 Microsoft company meeting where Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer said they wanted Office everywhere, so they wanted it ubiquitous, and they just wanted to be able to charge a couple of pennies every time you used it. I don't think we've quite reached that model, but it's interesting that it took 20 years to kind of get here.
Just a wee few cents. Just a penny or two, just
exactly.
give us a quid, would you? Yeah.
Yeah, forget nickel and diming you to death. We're just going to penny you to death.
Just pennies, that's fine.
On the industry release front, Apache JMeter release 2.9. The final version of it is out. Arrived on January 28th. Details, it has a new extractor syntax to pull information from return pages. Handles more document types on the return, such as Acrobat, Microsoft Office, and OpenOffice files within different elements. A new regular expression parameter preprocessor, something that I'm going to make use of is this next one, which is the new JMS publisher option. So for all those of you who are dealing with queue environments, with the Java message server queue, that's going to be really, really nice for the improvements there. Of course, I don't know why any vendor puts this in here as a feature for a new release, but of course we have memory and performance updates. I think that should be expected in a new release at this point.
Particularly for load testing tools, right? And this is something that, if you remember old versions of JMeter, they always got knocked from this, and they so good on them for addressing some of their internal the caching they use, the memory usage, and having a healthy load generator improves the accuracy of the tool. We've learned these lessons in LoadRunner and a long time ago. I remember Segway as well, competing with Segway on the most efficient and accurate driver for a lot of these kinds of things. So that's it may seem like we can make that assumption, but never make that assumption for an open source volunteer type tool to really be making those kinds of strides. That's not easy. So good on you, JMeter guys, 2.9 for optimizing your driver. That's a good thing.
There are some interface updates related to the new functionality, and feedback from the community kind of streamline some processes which are used quite often. And Mark, I believe you have some news on the Grid Init and BlazeMeter fronts related to JMeter?
Sure. Our friends Tim Koopmans at Grid Init and Daniela and Alon, who's been on the show, from BlazeMeter, both, this has been, 2.9's been out for a week. Of course, they're tuned into the JMeter team, so they may have been testing with the beta ahead of things. But the nice thing is that even your vendors that are doing massive JMeter driver implementations in the cloud, Tim just tweeted me last night, and I got a direct message from Daniela at BlazeMeter this morning. So both Grid Init and BlazeMeter are supporting 2.9. It's a minor release, so and there's not a lot of major movements. I think 2.8 was probably a month or two ago. But it's nothing major changed, but good on them. So both of those tools are supporting the latest version already. So that's great.
And there are two other industry news items. First up in the last two is SOSTA. We're all familiar with SOSTA. They've been granted a patent on their technology related to cross-cloud provisioning. You may not be aware of this, Mark, but SOSTA has something like 20 different cloud providers that they interface with for standing up load generators all around the world. So evidently they've built some innovative technology or an innovative technology layer which allows them to provision across all these providers, which is kind of neat.
It is kind of neat, and I think the idea that they've patented the ability to do that, or they at least applied for, and they've been accepted that the application will hold. So we got to go through the normal loops. But this is not the first. SOSTA's been, they're in the intellectual property game in this area and going after cloud. Their entire history, they started there. So, I mean, the fact that they're actually applying a patent to this cross-cloud provisioning, probably specific to a testing tool, I think that's pretty exciting. To find that the cloud is not, like we said last time in last week's episode last 2 weeks episode, the no fluff cloud performance, that there isn't a whole lot new about the cloud, and actually there must be something new about the cloud if SOSTA can go out and get a whole bunch of patents on it. So that's pretty exciting and innovative.
It is, and I would say if you want more information, including the patent numbers, you can look it up. Go to SOSTA's website, look under current press releases, you'll be able to find it. It's like number 1 or 2 on that list.
Yeah.
And then lastly is some kind of interesting consumer technology. I went to take a look at what was going on at the Consumer Electronics Show, and our friends at Seagate, yes, the old hard drive manufacturers, have a product called Seagate Wireless Plus, which took CNET's Best of CES 2013. It's basically a device, creates its own Wi-Fi network to allow tablets, smartphones, and computers to connect to it. It's got enough space for 500 high-def movies. It's got a 10-hour battery life, so you can stick it in the back of the minivan as you go on vacation, and the kids can stream movies through the whole trip and stay quiet and not beat on each other in the back seat, as my brother and I used to do.
Yes.
For entertainment.
Yes.
And it's it was a DLNA certified, so you can store music, movies, you can store all those pictures from your vacation. So when your friends come over, you can do the mock slideshow on your big screen TV. And
it's more portable. That's the thing, right? Usually you've been tethered of some sort to take this, but storage space gets smaller, the Wi-Fi capability gets smaller. So I think Seagate has all sorts of stuff. They have enterprise storage. They have consumer level individual component products. But this is, I think there was one of the companies they did an acquisition that actually drove this line in their business. And James, you were just out there at Seagate, weren't you? Out at least in Santa Cruz, right?
I was out there in December. I was helping some colleagues out there on some performance testing items related to mobile. They've got a really innovative set of products coming down the line that I don't think everything has been announced yet, so we can't really talk about it. But I would say keep your eye on Seagate. They have some things in the works that could be some market disruptors, and they have certainly been a market disruptor company in the past with innovations. Right on.
Well, that's good. So thank you, James, for researching the industry news for us. And by the way, folks, if you didn't know, it is a call-in talk show. So if you have a question about performance monitoring, today's topic, feel free to give us a call. Or you can email us your question at info@perfbytes.com, or, like I said, give us a call at 805-285-9869. There's a few folks in the chat room I see, and I think probably our Ethan is listening in as he dials in. So let's talk about today's topic. We'll get started on performance monitoring, and this is the way I'll introduce today's topics with sort of maybe it's proper to call, James, this would be called maybe an allegory. I don't know. Could be. But a wise man once said, "Is it cold in here, or is it just me?" Seriously, okay, maybe a wise man didn't say that, but think about that for a second, right? If the guy,
actually, Mark, I have a side perspective on that. I was watching television a couple days ago, and I can't remember if it was a TED Talks or it was an interview. But a former boss for both of us, Chairman Gates,
yes,
was on TV, and he was talking about his charity work and what he does now through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But he was also talking about a series of books and topics related to the importance of measurement.
Yes.
That until you have the proper measurement of your system, whether that system is related to inoculations for disease, in the case of charity work around the world, or measurements of your system, you don't know how to make an improvement.
Yes.
And I thought it was a great discussion. Mr. Gates has always got some interesting insight. Whether you like his insight or not on occasion is a different question, but It's always interesting. And this topic was very, very interesting. He went all the way back to the steam engine and said, at the dawn of the industrial age, you had all these different engine manufacturers, but no one could really compare one to the other until you had an agreed-upon series of measurements to understand how each machine performed compared to the other.
Right.
Which included horsepower, torque, reliability, and we can project those into today's modern computer systems.
Yes. And so Bill Gates is definitely a wise enough guy, I think, to look back at that. But even you don't have to be that wise to understand measurement, I don't think. If that guy, the guy I'm mentioning who asks, is it cold in here, is it just me? If he was really wise, probably would have some kind of device, like to measure horsepower is probably really a very elaborate thing. But anyone could measure objectively and exactly what the temperature was. If that device were specific enough, you could actually measure the difference between the ambient room temperature and your own body, right? If the device was sophisticated enough, it might even produce a historical tracking of the temperature. So a wiser man would know that without a measurement of temperature, without monitoring the temperature, as James, you point out also, and Bill Gates points out, there's no way to answer the question, is it cold in here or is it just me? Of course, every not so wise man like you and I, James, we know that that device is a thermometer, right? Very common. They're all over the place, and there's all sorts of different implementations of a common thermometer. But it is a scientific instrument. It's used to measure temperature based on an objective, standardized scale of Fahrenheit versus Celsius. But the idea is, what the heck does this have to do with computer performance? And the same situation is really true, as you point out, James. I agree. For if you have a question out there similar to, is it cold in here or is it just me? If you have questions about website or database or server performance, but you're not using sort of a scientific, objective mechanism for measuring or monitoring performance, then you can't really answer those questions. So really, performance monitoring, much like using a thermometer, is having a device that gives you an objective, and it is a scientific method of recording, of measuring performance, monitoring performance. But the real question is, James, and I'll put this to you, why do we monitor performance?
Well, at its core, it's because we have a set of finite resources. If we're looking at it from a standpoint of what do we monitor within the system, we have a set of finite resources that we want to understand how they are being used, so we don't use them all up. And the other half of that monitoring is monitoring for the end user perspective. We've all heard of checking for response times. And that corresponds to a set of end user expectations or end user requirements to understand whether we're meeting the objectives of the system and the expectations of the system as well. So there's two sides to that. One is the human side and the business side, and the other side is the technical side of make sure that we don't oversubscribe.
Yeah. So I would say for a lot of the customers that I encountered, they monitor because the tool does it. That's the process. Set up your monitoring and do the tool, but they don't really know why they're setting up and running monitoring. And to your point, there's you're monitoring end user response time because end users care about performance, right? Or to the point on capacity, we monitor the performance because we want to know the data that helps us estimate capacity. So a couple of things to keep in mind as to why you're going through the pain of setting up all of this performance monitoring is that you can actually prevent a failure if you know more about what the system is doing with its resources at any point. Or you can at least prevent maybe an outage before something gets worse. So if you're running at 75% CPU and the trend is going upwards, if you're monitoring performance and watching things go on, you can, before it gets even worse, you can probably prevent that. The other key thing from performance monitoring, and James, you and I are in vehement agreement on this. If you're doing a load test and trying to do tuning of your system of any kind, and you need to figure out what is slow in the system, finding a bottleneck. If you're doing load testing without monitoring, you can't tell somebody, oh, I know exactly why this is slowing down. I know where the bottleneck is. So with performance monitoring, you can learn what part of the system is actually causing the bottleneck or a slowdown. And that is incredibly important to do more than just run some load and who knows, right? You need to actually monitor it. The other thing is,
and not only that, you can save the company a ton of money.
Oh yeah.
If you can support the same number of users on smaller hardware because you are more resource efficient in how you are using those finite resources in the system, you can buy smaller hardware. Not only that, if you move it to commodity cloud provider where you're charged for every resource hit, then you're going to be paying less for that as well.
Yeah, exactly. And James, you and I worked on a gig recently where they're in the cloud. They've got kind of a hosting provider. They're still throwing, hey, I need an additional $50,000, another $100,000 a month in hardware, which is, it's not cheap, but when you're talking about, hey, if we could run the same load on half the hardware, that's a huge savings. You can also make money for your company by monitoring performance more effectively. So if you start monitoring performance and it leads you to a conclusion where you can say, well, you know what, we can run twice our load in my estimation, based on my scientific and objective measurements and the trends I see. If we can run twice the load, maybe I can call up the CEO and say, hey, Bob, because the CEO's name is always Bob, why don't we buy our competitor? Why don't we go into merger talks with a competitor or a whole new campaign because the system can handle it? We got tons of excess capacity. Let's go drive the business. Let's go come up with some way to use that capacity to make money. And so you can actually impact the bottom line, if not, actually improve profitability for a company. Or whatever your objectives are. If it's not making money, if you're not a capitalist, you're doing some good service or something like that. If it's an electronic service, you could do twice your thing. So you can grow. And that includes making those calculations, those what we call trending calculations, based on your performance monitoring data to be able to predict that future, right? So when are we going to run out of juice? Generally, I will say the more you know about how the resources are used across the entire system, I mean that both from the front end to the back end, and James mentioned response time on the front end. There's also, back end storage I/O, performance, CPU. There's also sort of a vertical way to look at it, right? So you can look at the base hardware capabilities, so network I/O, disk I/O, each individual machine, even virtual machine or physical machine, somewhere there's a physical processor running. And if you know the system vertically as well as horizontally, you can understand exactly how to be more valuable to your team, to the organization you're working in. And if you have a scientific and objective, if I haven't said those two words enough, keep in mind, performance monitoring is scientific and it's objective data about system performance. One of the nice things is you can usually shut down sort of finger pointing or blame games in your organization, the politics of performance, pretty quickly just by whipping out, a graph and saying, well, Jim, take a look. Jim is always the guy that's, stirring up trouble in these meetings. Don't look at my database. My database is fine. He's an Oracle administrator, by the way.
What are you saying there, Mark?
No biases. I'm just kidding. But, if you've got objective performance monitoring data, then you can pretty much put it out there as hey, let's stop. It's not about any one person. It's not personal. This is just objective data. And you can shut down that argument and move the conversation forward more quickly. So that's very valuable in today's, if you're in DevOps and everyone's piling on and, everyone's got a different tool and you've got, one really good set of performance monitoring data, you're going to be able to contribute and, move the ball forward pretty quickly to resolve those kinds of, that kind of political issue. What do you think about that, James?
I agree. More data is always better, and if you can convert the discussion from a passion play, because let's face it, developers are like parents. Their code is like their children. If you call their code ugly, and the old ugly baby issue, any parent is going to rush to defend their child in that case. And if you have objective data that can back up your claim, because the first thing they're going to do is they're going to attack your tests, they're going to attack your test integrity, they're going to attack you personally. They'll shoot the messenger from eons ago. You can make that a dispassionate argument. And quite often you can win over the person when you can show them, hey, when I look at this transaction, all of a sudden memory explodes in use, and we have a whole bunch of disk writes as well, and table scans on the database. So it really serves to move the process forward instead of putting all the passions in play when it comes time to say, something's not right here.
Yeah, it's not just an opinion. It's a more scientific, actual proposition that says, take a look at this. And suddenly, if you've never seen, like an engineer that doesn't do performance monitoring, and all of a sudden you show them their code running under load, and here's a CPU graph or a database table scan graph, all of a sudden they'll see, here's a baseline, and then spike. It's like, oh my gosh, this is definitely the problem. You don't have to be an expert in what those metrics mean, but if you can show the graph that, boom, that's when the problem happened, wow, you'll be able to cut through all of that and help someone go, wow, all right, you're right. It is something in the database. Let's go look there first. And I think that's keep it scientific, factual, and use that data. Let the data speak for itself. And James, we'll take a little bit of an advertisement break here, and then we'll come back at the bottom of the hour here with the news of the damned. You ready?
I'm ready. Hosting for PerfBytes.com has been provided by NewCo, New Centers of Excellence in Performance Engineering, PowerTest Professional Services, The Script Farm, LoadRunner by the Hour, Tech, Cloud Architect, and No Load Test. For more information, go to www.newcoe.com or call 703-856-8187.
Marvelous. And thank you,
and Mark, I think you should also bring to everyone's attention your firm, West Evergreen Consulting.
Yes, I am a consultant. You may not know that. I am an independent consultant. I actually work with a buddy of mine, Luke, who's works for a staffing firm. And so I put together a lot of – it's nice to have a kind of a partner to work with if I have a small team, currently a small team at a customer. But independently last year I've done all sorts of trainings and workshops. I help people up. I have lots of individual mentoring. I have 2 mentors right now that I do via Skype. I help people get their performance strategy together and then implement either automation or whatever practices that need to be improved at your company. I can help get you that direction and actually help you improve your recommendation. I started last year, so I'm celebrating this actually in February here. It's officially 1 year as West Evergreen Consulting, which is the name of the street that I live on, by the way. West Evergreen, 220 West Evergreen.
And Mark, I think we should tell everyone where we're going to be coming up in case we want to meet our listeners for feedback. I know I'm going to be in the Washington, D.C. area this coming weekend. So Saturday morning breakfast, I'll put up details on the website if anyone wants to meet me for breakfast.
Yes.
I'll buy the first round of soft drinks for your feedback. I'd like to hear it. And I believe both of us are going to be in San Diego in April for STP.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. I think we're still getting our plans together as to doing something more formally at the show. But I have a presentation at STPCon, and it'd be good to have PerfBytes there. Come visit us. I'm actually going to be also in April, not too far out. I'll be in the Twin Cities. And Twin Cities for the Twin Cities Quality Assurance, my old stomping ground. I grew up there, in Minnesota. So Twin Cities Quality Assurance Association, I'm actually giving a presentation at their normal meeting on a Thursday night. I'll post the dates. Also giving a workshop, a one-day workshop on Friday about performance test planning, performance test practice management, and improving performance test design. So that's a one-day workshop there. That's what's coming at least in the next couple of months here for sure. So come visit us.
Yes, please. Like I said, Mark and I will place our kind of travel itineraries on the site, and we'd be happy to meet you in person and get your feedback on the show and how we can help improve it.
Cool. James, we've Cyanide is back in our chatting session, one of our longtime listeners. He was mentioning, he's in the chat room here with us, performance monitoring such as Zabbix or Nagios. And I just replied, is there a specific question? But maybe we'll hear from him specifically. But right now, let's go to our regular News of the Damned.
Welcome to News of the Damned. So we'll begin with Michelle Obama. Our First Lady has had an issue since Barack Obama's first election in that she keeps knocking over websites. She is like our Woman of the Year last year, who basically can put on an article of clothing, go out, and then all of a sudden websites go down. Well, it happened again, and it happened on inauguration night at the inauguration ball. She wore a dress from a designer named Jason Wu, and unfortunately, they did not let Mr. Wu know ahead of time. So Mr. Wu's website went crash, bang, boom, as people went to the website to see what his other offerings were once they saw Miss Obama was wearing them. Once again, we've got a point load issue, and this, of course, puts our First Lady, Michelle Obama, in contention for Woman of the Year, competing with Dr. Oz from our last show. So we'll see how she does. Item number 2 from News of the Damned is from Belfast, Northern Ireland. The police organization there opened up applications for new recruits, and depending upon the news source you look at, anywhere from 100,000 to 300,000 people rushed the website to try and apply. As you might think would happen, it did actually happen. It went down. We can make a joke about this and say, well, the website gave up and went to the local pub and started drinking and singing. But it did actually take 1,000 applications before they shut off the floodgates. Item number 3, Bank of America. This happened last Friday. People signing on the 1st of February, attempting to pay bills that were due the previous day, 31st of the month, were greeted with nice, friendly messages such as temporarily unavailable. This did not impact ATMs or branch office operations. It only impacted the website and, of course, telephone banking. So things were kind of back to normal by end of day on Friday and certainly back to normal on Saturday. But a lot of people were really angry and pissed off on the 1st. I think the whole Twitterverse was all a Twitter on this one. So this brings us to the sounds of music. We could not have a News of the Damned, it seems, without having something about artists, concerts, or something else in the entertainment industry. And we have a couple of items here. One is the website for the band My Bloody Valentine went down almost as soon as it was put up at midnight this past Saturday. Evidently, high interest in the band's new album and tour dates is what took it down almost immediately. Miranda Hart, who I believe we mentioned before, related to something she mentioned on a radio show broadcast in the UK. Her website went down over the weekend, and evidently Miranda has some sort of Drew Carey-like show on the BBC called the the Miranda Hart Show or something like that. So anyway, her site crashed due to ticket demand for new comedy dates. The Ultra Music Festival. I'm not familiar with this festival. Are you familiar with it, Mark?
No, I'm actually not. I looked it up because you posted it. I had not been familiar, but as they point out, it's massive.
Exactly. So massive on this 15th anniversary show that when they put in kind of the second set of artists, or phase 2 of the lineup, the site was swamped. People had such high interest that they just rushed to the site, I guess, to get tickets or do whatever for the Ultra Music Festival. And the site went down.
Yeah.
So once again, we're looking at the situation, and the trend continues. It's all point load failures, where we have some external event which has driven load to the website. Sometimes you can plan for this, like the announcement of the new positions available for the Belfast Police Department. You can imagine they knew that was coming. They could have made plans to stage that load someplace other than their core website. That was simply bad planning. I have sympathies for Jason Wu related to the Michelle Obama incident, because nobody evidently knew what the designer was of the gown that the First Lady was going to be wearing. The music industry, particularly in the UK, we seem to have a real problem in the UK with the music industry and websites. They just need to get over it and learn that they need to contact a content distribution provider in advance.
That is correct.
And just go ahead and stage it out before they make any announcements in the future, or else this is just going to keep happening.
Yes. Beautiful, James. I think when it comes to, here's the thing, right? With a lot of these, take our last episode, which is about the cloud, the speed with which you can react. Like if you were in Belfast and, maybe they don't have the greatest IT resource pool, and maybe they don't have a lot of budget left over for that. But the idea that if they were monitoring the site, and this is or they had a system that could monitor and react. We think about these auto-healing or self-healing elastic cloud capability. Oh, hey, you're running out of resources. Let me throw 3 more AMIs at it. So it's really interesting that we've not totally automated connecting performance monitoring to the back-end provisioning. And if you're not monitoring, you can't set up auto elasticity in the cloud. So you got to have both. You got to have great automation in the back end for deployment and provisioning, and combine that with the information from performance monitoring. Absolutely. So James, actually, I was having a chat session while you were. I didn't mean to ignore the News of the Damned. I love the News of the Damned, but Cyanide posted a question really talking about sort of performance monitoring, your performance monitoring tool. And we haven't talked about tools yet on performance monitoring, but he brought up Nagios and another one called Zabbix, which is an open source similar kind of tool. If you're, speaking of elasticity, if you're going to expand your system from, say, 4 web servers to 100 web servers or 1,000 web servers, and you've built in the monitoring tool, the client, the agent that you would install to do that performance monitoring, the more nodes you build in your system, the more load ends up coming back onto the performance monitoring tool. itself, which is a very, very good point. To some extent, if you're going to build a large elastic kind of system, the performance tool should also be scalable enough to handle all of the extra nodes that you're going to put on it. I remember doing implementations. Actually, Carlos, our buddy Carlos, does a lot of BAC implementations from HP. And the old Topaz stuff years ago, same problem. We'd set up, the core systems, maybe 100 nodes, all on Topaz, and then there was this, do we need more hardware? Can we scale out the performance monitoring tool at the same time? So it's a very good point to make sure that, let's say with Nagios or with Splunk is a great logging monitoring tool. It has a huge index, right? So it just goes on, and you have to make sure that tool can keep up with the growth in your system.
I think there have been some design considerations for that, really, that have taken place over the last couple of decades. If you look at tools like Nagios, and I forget the other one that was mentioned, a lot of them take advantage of industry standard interfaces like SNMP, the Simple Network Management Protocol interface, and other built-in interfaces for the operating system that are native, so you don't have to have an agent in those cases. But getting back to SNMP, SNMP version 1 was basically a polling type of situation. So for every node I added, I would have to poll that device regularly to collect status on this device. As SNMP has matured into versions 2 and 3, we now have an interrupt-driven model. Yeah. So instead of having to poll all the time, I can set thresholds at which, if I spin up a new instance, for instance, of a cloud-based AMI, I can have it automatically notify me via SNMP when it reaches 75% of its projected CPU, at which point I know, I perhaps need to spin up another instance.
Yeah.
Just as insurance at that point. So you can have a little bit of load leveling as you grow, simply because you're being interrupted versus having to go out and directly interrogate every single one. And SNMP is available on just about every operating system and every device I can think of, except I haven't seen an SNMP agent on a tablet or a phone, but there's probably one out there.
Oh, it's under there. It under the what was the HP, the Palm Plus? They had that really cool stuff in the Palm world from HP, and that was that was a full. Yeah, it's probably out there. So James, as we move on, one of the things you brought up, we want to talk about. People want to know what to monitor. Right? So what kinds of things to monitor? And of course, with every performance testing tool out there, even the non-load testing type tools, right? The number one thing that most things monitor is elapsed transaction time, right? So start the stopwatch, do something, stop the stopwatch. And so it's a very simple concept that we measure, if you were in grade school and running in a relay race or, something like that, or you're timing how long does it take you to get home from the store. Is starting and stopping, the stopwatch, doing something is a very straightforward thing. So measuring time is pretty good, right? So if you start and stop that action, right, when you click the submit button and then a call goes back to the servers and then comes back with a response, that's called response time. What a great idea, right? The servers respond to the client, the end user, that's response time. If you do nothing else, if you monitor nothing else, monitor response time, because you'll learn something and be valuable. It's not, but we really want to encourage you that you're kind of driving blind if you don't monitor the server and network resources. And again, that's CPU and memory and disk and network. And the reason I separate those, and James, this is something I actually picked up from you last year, is to think of CPU and memory sort of different from disk and network. So CPU and memory are really monitoring the performance of the processes inside the code, right? Accessing memory, buffers, allocating, deallocating memory, executing transactions, calculations. So CPU and memory are of a specific resource type that's sort of working inside the code and how it works within the kernel.
And it is a faster interface as well. So it's several orders of magnitude faster then the other resources, which are disk and network, which actually require some sort of physical movement, either of an armature to read and write to the disk, or sending a signal off the bus across the network to something else, which is even slower still than disk in many cases.
Yeah, and this is the difference for when you think separate it from grid or high performance computing, where you actually have CPU and memory over the network. I mean, you have these, you're running distributed workloads. Still breaking down even a multi-node cluster for HPC, you're looking at I/O performance separate from CPU and memory. So these resources, basically for monitoring them, the place to start is to monitor them simply for their usage, the percentage usage, which is quite simply the total amount of the resource that you have in the machine, divided by the amount in use at any time. So if I have a 4 gig machine, 4 gigs of RAM, and I know the total amount is 4 gig, and I measure the application, maybe it's a .NET application or a Java-based application or even just a normal executable, what's the private working bytes? How much memory is reserved and allocated to that machine or that process? So with that process, maybe it's only using 1 gig of memory. So you're at 25% usage of memory. Well, if you've ever looked at Task Manager in Windows or run a ps-ef in Unix, you notice that there's lots and lots and lots of processes that are running on a machine at any time. They all take up memory, and they all take up CPU. So being able to monitor how much they're using for CPU, how much system time and user time out of the last minute, what's the percentage time second by second that the CPU is using for system, meaning system calls, device drivers, kernel time is another way to say it, versus my code, the user code. So this is an application I'm running in the user space. It gets a different priority. It has different permissions. So user time versus system time, percentage usage for CPU. We already talked about memory, so available bytes of RAM. The other thing would be, as you mentioned, James, bytes per second. So on the network, how many bytes per second am I moving down the wire? And in networking, you want to monitor things like retransmissions. Retransmissions would mean, hey, this packet didn't make it to the other side of the network, and so some timeouts have been set up, so I have to retransmit, and that's an unhealthy network. Buffering. So if you're actually sending a whole bunch of stream of stuff and those packets are getting buffered, are you out of buffer space maybe somewhere on the switch or within the interface itself? Speaking of the interface, there's queuing. So if you want to push more packets down the wire, but they're being backed up because the network is at 100% utilization, you're looking at queues. Queuing is bad. It's slow. And for disks, right? So for disk, or maybe fiber channel or whatever, again, bytes moving in and out. If you've got a 4 gig per second fiber channel, you want to monitor how many, 400 megabytes per second can move down a 4 gig link on a SAN. How many disks or channels how many fiber channel cards do you need to move 2 gigabytes per second?
Not only that, Mark, but you're looking at read weights, write weights, seek time issues.
Yep.
I mean, unless you have static RAM drives, you're going to have physical components that actually have to move to put bytes to and read bytes from.
Yeah, and I'll say also the once you figure out what to monitor, again, CPU, memory, disk, and network, it's a mantra of ours. There are specific things like tips that we can give you. Like you would start out by monitoring, like in memory, like what's the number one thing you want to look for? What's the performance anomaly that we want to monitor for? Like one popular one for memory is just swapping. And swapping, which is usually to a page file or to disk, is that there's memory pressure. I'm running out of memory. Unless you're in Windows, and Windows maybe uses a page file more frequently for other temporary use. But, you can tune a system to have almost no page file, and if it needs to swap, wow, I'm kind of running out of memory, and I need to go from, as you pointed out, James, really fast CPU and memory, and I'm going to swap out to comparatively really slow disk. even a buffer, right? So swapping is a memory condition, and you can monitor. Just show me the percent swap, a swap condition of some sort.
And some of this is a design issue as well, because when you build your code, you can mark the code as swappable or not in many operating systems for when you deploy. So if you have an environment which is very RAM rich, then you want to maintain performance and guarantee that your particular code has fast as possible working. Mark it as not swappable. The operating system will leave it in RAM and will take other candidates that are less critical and push it to disk, but maintain that piece of code which is critical for performance in memory, so it will not be impacted.
Yeah, and that can work for you and against you, to be honest, right? So at some point you can...
Yeah, if you've got a leak in that, especially, eventually it takes up all your memory and chokes your system.
Exactly. So one of the benefits of being able to do iterative load testing is to constantly confirm for your components that is working optimally. The other thing I'll say, another good one, context switches. This goes back a ways, CPU-wise, but context switches, which is, if you think about ADD, right, attention deficit disorder, if you have a very diverse sort of fragmented set of instructions you're throwing down the pipeline to a CPU, and it's got to constantly switch between states, there's two things that could be monitoring for CPU and context switches. If context switching is high, one thing might be that there are instructions in the pipeline, but there's waiting on something, so it can't really serve that instruction, so it's got to switch to another. So do another wait, do another wait, do another wait. So a wait state can actually drive up context switches in mild waiting. Not I would say locking, but blocking to some extent, maybe thread blocking. The other thing that context switches can be is just that you have too much diversity and too much different stuff running on the same machine, right? So it's got to go back and forth in context switches between two high-priority items or three high-priority items. It doesn't happen that often at this point when you can scale things out and move unique workloads on different stuff. But, hey, it's really popular with your CTO or your CIO that we're going to do a massive consolidation. We're going to go from 20 data centers down to one, and we're going to use the cloud and do this, that, and the other thing. With consolidation, if you're jamming a bunch of workloads together into smaller and smaller and more concentrated hardware space, you're ending up with diverse workloads under high pressure. So context switching is important. Another one, disk time. This one, there's a lot of debates on sort of, I like to look at the amount of time per individual I/O read or write request. So if I'm looking at something greater than, say, 10 milliseconds or 20 milliseconds per individual I/O request, if it's on a write, I know that's I'm starting to push back either the buffer or the cache on that drive, cache acceleration on the system. So looking at how long it takes just to submit one I/O request for writing, and then compare that to read. And you'll find that if the controller on the disk system is optimized for read, and I need to write to it a lot, then I've got some configuration in the database that's wrong, and I need to be read-write balanced, or I need to go one way or the other.
By the way, that might work really well for an index.
Yeah, if you've got an index and you want to have very, very no scanning, right? That's another one we'll talk about in a second, right, in the database. Yeah, if you've got indexing, you want that to scan really fast. Guess what? You want to be able to read really fast. So I like to look at individual I/O requests health. That's another one that I monitor for the disk. Let's get into – there's more to monitor than just CPU, memory, disk, and network. There's also in .NET or in Java, the framework, the actual runtime you have. A favorite of mine is exceptions per second. Now, James, why do you think exceptions per second is popular for me?
Because I have to stop what I'm doing and go handle something else before I can get back to my core task.
Yes. Have you seen that PowerPoint slide that shows the iceberg, where there's like a tip of the iceberg at the top, but then there's a huge iceberg underneath the water? Just imagine that for a second. You can visualize it.
Yeah, that's the performance testing skills iceberg.
Yes, the performance testing skills iceberg. your user mode exception, depending on how you're handling it, is just the tip of the iceberg. If you throw a system exception, it could nest all the way down. And guess what? System exceptions are very costly because they get higher priority to block the CPU and block the kernel. So if you're throwing a lot of exceptions per second and the percentage in Task Manager, if you show the kernel times, you'll see a big red bar in Task Manager. But looking at XLOCs and looking at blocking in the kernel is exceptions per second. Scrub those out. Don't abuse your exceptions, because then you're spending wasting a lot of CPU time. Database wise, there's a lot of stuff. Scanning a physical table with disk is slow, as we talked about. If you can turn that into an index and you can get a seek would be great. There's an index scan, but seeking is nice and fast because seeking is in memory. So monitoring the ratio between the number of scans and the number of seeks, that's pretty good. You might be missing an index. Blocking and locking in the CPU, that's really important as well. So how many blocks, meaning you've got a session or a query that has to wait for something else before it can get access. So latching or lightweight locking, or even straight up deadlocking. That is bad code.
That's a very bad thing. Yes.
It's usually not. It's maybe exacerbated by physical load, which is why we see it under extreme load and stress tests. But deadlocking is a logical contention, right? You can resolve deadlocking in your code. There's no reason for it to happen. That's get out your database in depth. Sorry, I had to go look at my bookshelf for a second here. Database in depth is great. There's a couple other best practices, James, here. Maybe there's one on monitoring, right? Monitoring load generators. You want to maybe comment on that before we close out?
Well, I tend to have a perspective of, for every operating system or guest operating system, and I consider databases and Java virtual machines and .NET VMs all as guest operating systems. I want to encourage everyone to go and pick 10 characteristics in each of the CPU, disk, network, and memory category that you can get off of each of those operating systems that are indicative of a resource contention and a bottleneck, and ones that you fully understand, can explain to someone else, and can support. And going along with that, when you are under a performance test, you do want to monitor your load generators, because your load generators can actually become a bottleneck to the test. For most performance testing tools, the code is not marked as in-memory only for virtual users. And that leads to an issue of spillover into swap space when you have a large number of users on the box where it oversubscribes the memory. So you'll have deliberate slowing on the part of your virtual users, which, if you don't have a control group so you understand this, what's happening, you can take that as being a problem with the app.
Yeah.
So you'll have a false negative in this case. You can also have situations on the load generators, if you have logging turned on or have it accidentally turned on, where the disk subsystem, where all the virtual users are fighting for contention to write, that becomes the bottleneck.
Yes.
And things of that nature. So rule of thumb, pick each of those 4 categories, go pick 10 that you know can articulate to someone else, can support and defend, and do that for every piece of architecture in your environment, including your load gens.
Yes. Well, PerfBytes listeners, once again, you've come to the close of yet another brain-rattling occurrence of PerfBytes. Thank you for listening. As always, we want to thank James's mother for tuning in, because we know at least one live listener is actually paying attention to what we're saying. And certainly I will give my intimately embarrassing thank you to the sexy Irish voice of PerfBytes, and for moderating today's calls. Today's PerfBytes show was powered by the TARDIS, traveling through time with performance. And of course, also be aware that the content of this PerfBytes show is copyrighted and protected in a similar fashion to the National Marine Protected Areas. Marine protected areas can play a critical role in protecting marine biodiversity, ecosystem function, and sustaining healthy coastal communities. Monitoring is a key component of an effective, adaptively managed national system. So monitoring, it's not just about system performance, it's also about the ocean. For more information about PerfBytes, you can visit the show's website at perfbytes.com. You can follow us on Twitter at PerfBytes, B-Y-T-E-S, PerfBytes. And please get up early next time. In 2 weeks, February 19th, 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The topic will be tuning the performance of your lamp stack. So turn on the lights and make your lamp stack go better. And you should know you can always subscribe and listen to the PerfBytes show as a podcast on iTunes. Just do a search for PerfBytes, B-Y-T-E-S, P-E-R-F-B-Y-T-E-S in the iTunes store and click subscribe. And lastly, of course, all over the world, it is International Pancake Day today at your local IHOP. So go out to breakfast or lunch and have a pancake and tip your host very well. Our best wishes go out to Gabby at the International House of Pancakes in Beaverton, Oregon. Happy International Pancake Day, everybody, and thank you for listening to PerfBytes.